For about 100 years, table salt has been fortified with the essential nutrient iodine. Over that time, some pretty horrific health problems that used to be commonplace have all but vanished from the developed countries where most of you apparently live, according to my analytics. However, there's reason to believe that people aren't eating as much of this stuff as they used to. I know I'm not, and that has some public health folks worried. A guy like me probably doesn't have to be too concerned because I get iodine from lots of other foods, notably dairy and seafood. But if you're pregnant or you could become pregnant, the experts definitely say you should be making a conscious effort to make sure you're getting your iodine. Also, if you are a vegan. In the context of nutrition science, iodine is considered an essential mineral. It's in there with things like iron, zinc, manganese, things we all need to ingest in small amounts in order to live. In the context of like every other science, iodine is a chemical element found throughout the universe and across the surface of the Earth, most notably the ocean. That's why people in coastal areas historically have not had much trouble with iodine deficiency. There's iodine in marine fish and also in edible seaweeds. Iodine from the ocean also makes its way into the soils on land, and from there it gets into fresh drinking water and all kinds of food crops grown in iodine-rich soil. But of course, not everybody lives in coastal areas, and even then it's not that simple. The distribution of iodine across the Earth's land masses is kind of weird. There are some coastal areas that don't have that much iodine, and there's some inland areas that actually have a lot of iodine. Geologists suspect this might be the result of glaciation in the last ice age, glaciers moving stuff around the continents. But an example of a very big region with very low iodine is that way.
Northern portion of the United States was known as the Goiter Belt, with sort of an area of focus right around the Great Lakes region in the Midwest.
This is Dr. Elizabeth Pierce, an endocrinologist and professor at Boston University's med school. And yeah, it's time to talk about goiters.
So a goiter just means thyroid enlargement. And it can be something that's very subtle, where it can really only be detected, by doctors using ultrasound. But it often, in profoundly iodine deficient regions, can be huge. It's sort of like this on the front of the neck. Very uncomfortable, as you might imagine, just a lot of sort of extra tissue taking up space that can make it challenging to swallow, make people sort of have a chronic cough because it's pushing on the windpipe.
Just a century ago, so many people from Pennsylvania to Washington state had swollen thyroid glands. And this might never have been documented had it not been for the young Serbian nationalist who assassinated Austro-Hungarian Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914, sparking the First World War.
A huge proportion of potential military recruits from Michigan were considered ineligible for service, either because they had intellectual impairment, probably from their mothers having been iodine deficient when they were pregnant, or because they simply had goiters so large they couldn't fit their necks into a military uniform.
Yikes, right? Our bodies need iodine to make thyroid hormone, and we use thyroid hormone to regulate our body's usage of energy from food. A lot of the ailments associated with chronic iodine deficiency have been known historically as cretinism. This is where the insult cretin comes from. Goiters, low energy, sometimes weight gain, and in the children of iodine-deficient mothers, intellectual disabilities. That's the big one. The idea of fortifying salt with iodine was first implemented in Switzerland in 1922. Switzerland is that way. Salt was the logical place to put it. Everybody eats salt every day. At the chemical level, iodine bonds easily to salt. There's iodine naturally in sea salt like this, though not nearly as much as you need. And contrary to popular belief, you probably cannot taste the iodine in salt. There have been studies with tasting panels. It does not affect food quality. The US salt industry also started iodizing salt voluntarily in the 1920s. A couple of decades later, World War II happened. All the young men in the upper Midwest had to report to their local draft boards again and get physicals. It was the perfect case study to see if iodine supplementation was working, and boy was it. The goiter belt was simply gone, and it was the same story in countries all over the world, quite notably some ones that way.
South America, Latin America were profoundly iodine deficient, most countries 100 years ago, and the whole region largely is iodine sufficient now because of salt iodization programs. Much of Africa, much of Asia, really it's been the primary tool in eliminating iodine deficiency disorders around the planet.
Salt iodization is considered one of the most successful public health interventions ever, right up there with fluoridation. And I am applying fluoride to my teeth thanks to the sponsor of this video, Spotlight Oral Care, whom I'll now briefly thank. I brought my new sonic toothbrush from Spotlight on this little beach vacation we're on. One of the worst parts of my job making videos is having to spend so many hours contemplating my own dumb face. And I've been dismayed to realize how yellow my teeth are. Spotlight Oral Care was started by a couple of Irish dentists. It's an evidence-based brushing and whitening system that's really gentle. It's okay on sensitive teeth, it's vegan and cruelty-free. I have really messed up gums, in part because my stress goes straight to my jaw. And this was way more gentle than any electric toothbrush I've ever tried. Really deep clean, and the battery lasts more than 2 months on a single charge. I'm also excited to see my teeth start to brighten up thanks to these strips. You can join the Spotlight Club yourself and get 25% off your first order by using my link and code in the description. Link and code in the description, 25% off Spotlight. Thank you, Spotlight. So yay, salt iodization fixed the iodine deficiency problem everywhere it was implemented. But experts like Dr. Pierce are worried that we might be starting to see a little resurgence. Why? Well, one reason might be that in countries like the US, we're not cooking and eating at home nearly as much as we used to.
77% of the salt that we ingest in this country is said to be from restaurant foods or commercially processed foods. Those foods are typically not made with iodized salt. So it's really only about 10 or 11% of the salt that we ingest, which is the salt that we're adding in cooking or adding at the table, is potentially iodized. And even of that salt in the US, currently only 52% of the market share is iodized salt.
And of course, one big driver of that problem is me, and maybe you. Insufferable foodies who are all obsessed these days with the fancy salts. Kosher salt, sea salt, big, crunchy, delicious, non-uniform flakes that usually have little, if any, iodine in them. Good old iodized table salt with its tiny, uniform, square crystals? This is passé. This is grandma's salt. In fact, I think it may have literally been decades since I regularly cooked with this or had it at the table. So why isn't my thyroid exploding out of my shirt? Well, I do eat a lot of fish, and marine fish in particular have lots of iodine, though it varies a lot from fish to fish. I eat a lot of bread, and some bread is baked with potassium iodate dough conditioners to delay staling, though most bread makers are using bromide dough conditioners instead these days, and there's no iodine in that. But I also eat a fair amount of dairy.
And iodine gets into milk and other dairy foods in a couple of ways. One is that the cows have some iodine in their diet. Turns out cattle don't yield a whole lot of milk if they're hypothyroid. Some of it is probably from the use of iodine-containing cleansers in the dairy industry to wash off the cows, to wash off the milking equipment. And some of that just gets absorbed across the cow's skin and then secreted into milk. Some of it, probably tiny amounts, does get into the milk supply directly from those cleansing products. And those make dairy foods a really good source of iodine, probably our most important source of iodine in this country right now.
But if you don't eat meat or dairy, then Dr. Pierce thinks you should definitely be trying to use iodized salt. And guess what? If you look on the internet, you can find some fancy, flaky salts that are iodized. None of these are endorsements from me. These are just some of the products that I found on the market when I went looking. Dr. Pierce would also absolutely recommend that anyone who's pregnant or could become pregnant make a concerted effort to get your iodine. And there is some data indicating that pregnant women here in the United States are seeing some resurgence of iodine deficiency.
And so the real concern, I think the driving concern these days is not so much the severe iodine deficiency that gives people the huge sort of goiter that's visible and obvious. It's more subtle effects where population level IQ can be decreased a few points, even in regions that are only relatively mildly iodine deficient.
You can also get iodine from a pill, of course, and most multivitamins here in the US at least have 150 micrograms, which is the recommended daily amount. For myself, I think I'm going to buy one of those iodized flaky salts. You do you.